The morning mist clings to the jungle canopy like the breath of ghosts, rolling through ancient trees that have never known the bite of an axe. Somewhere deep in the heart of an unnamed mountain range, where modern maps still show only green expanses marked unexplored, lies a valley that locals refuse to name. They call it simply, the place where men go to die. Picture this scene. Dawn breaks over a landscape untouched by time. Towering cecropia trees stretch toward a sky barely visible through the emerald ceiling above. The air is thick, humid, alive with the symphony of 1,000 creatures. Yet beneath it all, there's something else. A silence that shouldn't exist. A stillness that makes even the boldest hunters turn back at the valley's edge. The indigenous peoples of the surrounding highlands have lived in these mountains for countless generations. They know every stream, every animal path, every seasonal shift in the forest's rhythm. But when you ask them about the valley, their voices drop to whispers. Their eyes dart toward the tree line as if something might be listening. There are people there, they'll tell you, but they are not like us. Legend speaks of a tribe that moves like shadows through the perpetual fog. They appear without warning and vanish just as quickly, leaving behind only the echo of their presence and the bodies of those who dared to enter their domain. But here's what makes the hair on your neck stand on end. They don't kill everyone. Women, children, even teenage boys are found days later, wandering the jungle's edge in a daze, unable to speak of what they've seen. But the men never return, not one, not ever. The stories have persisted for so long they've become woven into the very fabric of local mythology. Mothers warn their sons never to hunt alone near the valley. Traders plan their routes to avoid even its distant approaches. And still, despite all the warnings, despite centuries of terror, there are always those who don't listen. As you stand at the valley's rim today, the sight is both beautiful and terrifying. Below, the jungle floor disappears into a sea of mist that never fully clears, even at the height of the dry season. Ancient trees emerge from the fog like the masts of sunken ships. The silence is absolute, broken only by the distant call of some unseen bird that sounds almost human. The locals say the mist itself is cursed, that it carries the spirits of the dead, swirling endlessly in search of peace they'll never find. They speak of shapes moving through the white veil, tall, graceful figures that seem more spirit than flesh. Figures that watch, that wait, that judge every soul who approaches their sacred boundary. But perhaps the most chilling detail in all the stories is this. The tribe doesn't hunt beyond their valley. They don't raid neighboring settlements or venture out to trade. They simply exist, like guardians of some terrible secret emerging only when their territory is violated. They are not conquerors. They are executioners. The government maps from the colonial era show this region as inhabited by hostile natives. But even the most ambitious expeditions of the 19th and 20th centuries gave the valley a wide berth. Military patrols that strayed too close returned with stories of voices in the mist, of shadows that moved against the wind, of the overwhelming sense that they were being hunted by something far more dangerous than any animal. What could create such fear? What could sustain a legend so powerful that it has kept an entire region unexplored despite centuries of human expansion? The answer lies somewhere in that perpetual fog, guarded by a people whose very existence challenges everything we think we know about human civilization. Scientists theorize about isolated tribes. Evolutionary anthropologists speak of cultural adaptation. But the locals know better. This isn't just another uncontacted people group. This is something else entirely. Something that has transformed isolation into a weapon, silence into a tool of terror, and mist into an impenetrable fortress. As night begins to fall across the valley, the fog seems to thicken. The shadows grow longer, and somewhere in that white void below, unseen eyes are watching, waiting, judging. Because the tribe that lives in the Forbidden Valley has kept one rule sacred for longer than anyone can remember. Men who enter their domain never leave. The valley breathes with ancient secrets, and tonight, like every night for countless centuries, it hungers for those foolish enough to believe that some boundaries are meant to be crossed. The year was 1847, when the British explorer Sir Edmund Hartwell first wrote about the Valley of Whispers in his journal. His words, discovered decades later in a water-damaged trunk in Calcutta, would become the first documented account of what locals had known for generations. The natives speak of a cursed place, Hartwell wrote, his handwriting growing increasingly erratic across the yellowed pages. They claim an entire people dwells there who have rejected all contact with the outside world. More disturbing still, they insist these people harbor a particular hatred for men, though they cannot or will not explain why. Hartwell's expedition included 12 men, fellow Englishmen, local guides, and porters. They were well-armed, well-supplied, and supremely confident in their ability to map the unmappable. The Victorian era was the age of discovery, when European explorers believed no corner of the earth should remain mysterious. They entered the valley on a Tuesday morning in March, just as the dry season was reaching its peak. None of them were ever seen alive again. 3 weeks later, search parties found their first camp, perfectly preserved as if the men had simply vanished mid-task. Breakfast was still cooking over a fire that had somehow burned continuously for days. Tents stood undisturbed, personal belongings neatly arranged, journals filled with detailed observations about plant life and topography. But there were no bodies, no signs of struggle, no indication of what had happened to 12 grown men. It was in Hartwell's final journal entry that investigators found the first clue. The handwriting changed dramatically in those last pages, transforming from neat Victorian script to frantic, almost illegible scrawls. We are being watched. Have been since we descended into the valley. Movement in the mist, always at the edge of vision. Thompson swears he saw faces in the fog yesterday, but when we investigated, found only air and silence. The local guides have disappeared. Did they flee or were they taken? God help us, I fear we have walked into something far worse than an unexplored territory. The final entry, barely legible, consisted of just 4 words: they only take men. But Hartwell's expedition was merely the first of many to vanish into the valley's embrace. Throughout the late 19th century, as European colonial powers carved up the globe, this one small region remained stubbornly unconquered, not for lack of trying. In 1863, a French geological survey team of 8 men entered the valley to map potential mining sites. Their final radio transmission spoke of figures moving through the trees and women's voices singing in an unknown language. The transmission cut off mid-sentence, and the team was never heard from again. The Germans tried in 1889, sending a military expedition, equipped with the latest rifles and communication equipment. They established 3 camps at intervals leading into the valley, each one more heavily fortified than the last. The final camp was found abandoned after just 2 days, with evidence of a feast that had been interrupted suddenly. Plates still full of food, wine glasses half empty, cigars smoldering in ashtrays. But the 12 soldiers and their commanding officer had simply vanished. Perhaps most disturbing was what the German search team found carved into a tree at the camp's perimeter, symbols that looked almost like a warning, etched with surgical precision into the bark. Local interpreters refused to translate the markings, claiming they represented words that should not be spoken by men. The pattern became horrifyingly consistent. Expeditions would enter the valley full of confidence in modern equipment. They would establish camps, send regular reports, document their findings with scientific precision. Then, without exception, their communications would take on an increasingly urgent tone. References to being watched, mentions of voices in the mist, descriptions of movement that defied explanation, and then silence. By the early 20th century, colonial administrators had quietly begun marking the valley as impassable terrain on official maps. Mining surveys were redirected around it. Trade routes gave it a deliberate wide berth. The area became a blank spot on the map, not because it was unknown, but because it was too dangerous to know. The most haunting discovery came in 1923, when a native hunter found what remained of the 1889 German expedition. Deep in the valley, partially hidden by decades of jungle growth, lay a collection of personal effects so perfectly preserved, they seemed to have been placed there yesterday. Pocket watches still ticking, photographs still clear in their silver frames, and journals filled with increasingly frantic observations about a people who seemed to materialize from the mist itself. One German officer's final entry, translated years later, read, "They are not savages as we understood the term. These people move with the precision of a military unit, strike with the efficiency of trained killers, and vanish with the skill of spirits. They have turned their isolation into a weapon more deadly than any we possess. God forgive us, we came here believing we were the superior force. We were wrong. But perhaps the most chilling evidence of all was what these expeditions left behind. Not just their belongings, but their stories. Stories that spread through the colonial networks, whispered in gentlemen's clubs and military barracks. Stories that transformed a remote valley into a legend of terror that would persist for generations. The valley had tasted European blood, and it had found the flavor to its liking. As the 20th century dawned, one thing had become terrifyingly clear. This was not simply an uncontacted tribe avoiding civilization. This was something far more deliberate, far more deadly. These people had weaponized their isolation, turned their valley into a perfect trap, and developed a hatred so focused, so precise, that it could distinguish between victims based solely on their gender. The age of exploration had met its match in a people who had turned mystery itself into their greatest weapon. The first survivor to speak was a man named Carlos Mendoza, a porter from the failed 1923 Belgian expedition. But when we say survivor, we use the term loosely, because what returned from that valley was barely recognizable as the man who had entered it. Mendoza had been found 3 days after his expedition vanished, wandering naked through the jungle 20 miles from the valley's edge. His hair had turned completely white despite his young age of 26. He spoke in whispers for the remainder of his life, as if afraid that speaking too loudly might summon something from the mist. They came without sound, he told the missionary who cared for him in his final years. One moment we were alone in our camp, and the next, they were simply there. Women mostly. Beautiful women with eyes like dark water and movements like hunting cats. But it was the children that terrified me most. They watched us with the patience of ancient spirits, as if they had been waiting for us specifically. According to Mendoza, the tribe didn't attack immediately. They observed. They studied. They seemed to be conducting some form of silent evaluation, moving through the camp like ghostly assessors determining the fate of each intruder. They separated us, he whispered, his hands trembling as he spoke. The women on one side, the men on the other. I was young then, barely past boyhood, and I think that saved me. They looked at me for a long time, these women with their painted faces and sharp eyes. One of them, older than the others, touched my face and spoke words I couldn't understand. Then they pushed me toward the women from our expedition. But it was what happened next that haunts every account from the rare survivors. The tribal women began what Mendoza could only describe as a ritual of judgment. They moved among the male members of the expedition, touching their faces, examining their hands, whispering to each other in a language that sounded like wind through leaves. They were deciding, Mendoza said, deciding who lived and who died. And the criteria, it wasn't strength or age or health. It was something else. Something I didn't understand then and pray I never understand now. The adult men were led away into the mist. Their screams echoed through the valley for hours, growing fainter and fainter until they became indistinguishable from the wind. But the women and children from the expedition, along with Mendoza, were kept at the camp for 3 days, fed strange fruits and given water from hidden springs. They treated us well, he recalled, but we were never alone, always watched, always judged. And at night we could hear them singing, hundreds of voices rising from the mist, songs that sounded like mourning and celebration combined. Other survivors emerged over the decades, each with variations of the same terrifying story. Maria Santos, the cook from a 1934 Brazilian survey team, spoke of women who moved through the jungle with supernatural grace, their faces painted with symbols that seemed to shift in the firelight. She described children who appeared and disappeared like smoke, and elders whose eyes held centuries of accumulated grief. They didn't hate us, Santos insisted to the doctors who treated her catatonia. They pitied us, as if we were bringing them a burden they were forced to bear. But the men they looked at with something deeper than hatred. It was like looking at an ancient wound that had never healed. The pattern became clear through these testimonies. The tribe had developed what could only be described as a sophisticated system of gender-based selection. Women were evaluated and often released. Children were spared without question. But adult men were marked for death from the moment they entered the valley. Dr. Elena Vasquez, an anthropologist from the 1956 Colombian expedition, provided perhaps the most detailed account of the tribe's behavior. She had been kept for 5 days before being escorted to the valley's edge and released. They have a matriarchal society unlike anything documented in anthropological literature, she wrote in her report. The women make all decisions, lead all rituals, and serve as both judges and executioners. But this isn't simply a reversal of patriarchal norms. It's something far more complex and frankly terrifying. Vasquez described a people who had elevated the elimination of men to a sacred duty. She witnessed rituals where the women painted themselves with ash and ochre, chanting in harmonies that seemed to make the very air vibrate. She saw children being trained in the art of silent movement through the jungle, and adolescent girls learning what she could only describe as the sacred mathematics of death. They have turned murder into a religious observance, she wrote. Each killing is preceded by ceremony, accompanied by ritual, and followed by what can only be described as spiritual celebration. They truly believe, that every man they kill brings them closer to some form of cosmic balance. But perhaps the most disturbing detail came from Pedro Alvarez, a teenage guide who survived the 1961 archaeological expedition. He spoke of seeing the bones of hundreds of men arranged in careful patterns throughout the valley, femurs forming geometric designs, skulls arranged in perfect spirals, rib cages woven together to create archways beneath which the tribal children played. They don't just kill, Alvarez whispered to the priests who interviewed him. They transform death into art, into architecture, into prayer. The entire valley is a monument to their hatred, built from the bones of every man who ever thought he could claim their land. The survivors' accounts paint a picture of a people who have transcended simple violence to achieve something far more sophisticated, a culture that has weaponized death itself, transforming murder into sacred duty and genocide into religious practice. And still, the question remains, what could create such focused, ritualized hatred? What could transform an entire people into precision killers who spare women and children but show no mercy to men? The answer lies deeper in the valley, buried beneath centuries of carefully orchestrated vengeance. To understand the tribe's deadly philosophy, we must journey back through layers of oral tradition, ancient carvings, and whispered histories that predate written records. Deep in the heart of the Forbidden Valley, hidden beneath centuries of jungle growth, lie the stone monuments that tell the true story, a story of betrayal so profound it rewrote the very DNA of human culture. The carvings were first discovered by Dr. Elena Vasquez during her 5-day captivity in 1956. Led by tribal women to a sacred grove where massive stone pillars rose from the jungle floor like ancient sentinels, she found herself face to face with a historical record carved in meticulous detail across tons of volcanic rock. The stones tell a story, she wrote in her hidden journal, but it's a story no civilization should have to tell. The earliest carvings date back approximately 800 years, depicting a thriving community that bore no resemblance to the deadly culture that exists today. These ancient people were traders, farmers, and artisans. They welcomed visitors, conducted business with neighboring tribes, and lived in harmony with both their environment and their neighbors. The carvings show men and women working together, children playing in mixed groups, and festivals where multiple tribes gathered to celebrate shared traditions. They called themselves the Yamalay, the people of the eternal mist, and they believed their valley was a sacred place where the spirits of their ancestors maintained the balance between earth and sky. The mist wasn't a weapon then. It was a blessing, a sign of divine protection that kept their crops fertile and their streams pure. But paradise has a way of attracting predators. The next series of carvings, dated approximately 6 centuries ago, tell of the arrival of warriors from the eastern mountains, a confederation of tribes driven by drought and desperation to expand their territory. The initial meetings were peaceful. The Yamalay, following their traditions of hospitality, welcomed the strangers, offered them food and shelter, and entered into negotiations for shared use of the valley's resources. The betrayal came during what should have been a celebration of their new alliance. According to the stone record, the Yamalay organized a great feast to honor their guests and cement their peaceful coexistence. The entire tribe gathered, men, women, children, and elders, to share food, exchange gifts, and perform the ritual dances that bound communities together. The visiting warriors participated eagerly, learning the sacred songs and joining in the ceremonies with apparent reverence and joy. It was all an elaborate trap. At the height of the celebration, when the Yamalay men were engaged in a traditional wrestling competition, and the women were preparing the sacred meal, the visitors struck. But this wasn't a battle. It was a systematic slaughter designed to eliminate every male member of the tribe, while leaving the women and children alive for purposes too horrific to fully comprehend. The carvings show the massacre in brutal detail. Yamalay men cut down mid-dance, their blood mixing with the sacred ceremonial paint. Fathers killed while teaching their sons traditional songs. Grandfathers murdered while blessing the union of their families with the visitors. Not one adult male survived the night that was meant to celebrate peace. But the invaders' plan went beyond simple conquest. They intended to erase the Yamalay culture entirely by taking the women as wives and raising the children as their own. They believed that within a generation, the valley would belong completely to their people, with no trace of the original inhabitants remaining. They had underestimated the depth of their victims' grief and the power of a mother's rage. The surviving Yamalay women, led by a priestess named Amayana, whose husband and 3 sons had been butchered before her eyes, made a pact that would reshape their people forever. Gathering in the sacred grove where the stone monument stood, they swore an oath by the spirits of their murdered men. Never again would a male outsider enter their valley and live. Never again would they trust, welcome, or show mercy to any man who was not born of their blood. But their vow went deeper than simple revenge. They transformed their entire culture into a weapon designed to prevent another massacre. The women took control of all aspects of society: governance, religion, warfare, and the raising of children. They developed new fighting techniques based on silence and stealth. They created weapons from the jungle itself and learned to move through the mist like spirits. Most importantly, they began the practice that would define them for centuries: the systematic elimination of any man who dared to enter their domain. The oath they swore, carved in the ancient script across multiple stone pillars, translates roughly as, "By the blood of our fathers, by the tears of our children, by the sacred mist that witnessed our shame, we swear this binding law: the valley shall be sanctuary for women and death for men, until the spirits of our murdered return to us, until the earth drinks the blood of enough invaders to wash away our dishonor, until the last echo of that night of betrayal fades from memory. No man shall pass our borders and see another dawn." What followed was perhaps the most remarkable transformation in human cultural history. Within a single generation, the Yamalay had evolved from peaceful traders into the most efficient killers their region had ever known. They developed hunting techniques that could track prey for weeks without detection. They learned to read the jungle so precisely they could predict a man's movements days before he made them, and they began recruiting. The carvings showed that the Yamalay didn't simply close their borders, they actively sought out women and children from other tribes who had suffered similar betrayals at the hands of men. Refugees from wars, survivors of raids, widows whose husbands had been killed by violent neighbors, all were welcomed into the valley and trained in the sacred duty of preventing future massacres. Over the centuries, this recruitment created a unique culture where the traditional tribal boundaries of blood and ethnicity became irrelevant. What mattered was gender and commitment to the blood law. Women of dozens of different ethnic backgrounds joined the tribe, bringing with them new fighting techniques, different languages, and varied survival skills. The result was a people who combined the best warrior traditions of multiple cultures, all focused on a single, terrifying purpose. The most chilling aspect of the carved records is how they document the gradual refinement of the tribe's killing methods. Early carvings show crude ambushes and simple weapons. Later stones depict sophisticated tactics, specialized tools, and ritualized execution methods that transformed murder into religious ceremony. They had learned that killing could be more than revenge. It could be communication. Every death sent a message to the outside world. This valley is forbidden. This people are beyond your reach. This boundary cannot be crossed. The systematic nature of their killings, the careful selection of victims, the precise timing of attacks, all of it served to maintain their isolation by creating a reputation so terrifying that most potential invaders turned back before they even reached the valley's edge. But perhaps the most disturbing evolution shown in the carvings is how the tribe began to view their role in the larger world. No longer seeing themselves simply as victims seeking revenge, they transformed into something far more complex. Guardians of a cosmic balance that required the regular sacrifice of male blood to maintain universal harmony. They believed, truly believed, that their murders were not crimes but sacred duties, that every man they killed brought the world closer to some form of divine justice, that their valley had become a holy site where the sins of all mankind could be absolved through ritual death. The blood law had become more than revenge. It had become religion. And still, 6 centuries later, the oath carved in stone continues to bind their descendants to a purpose that transforms every sunrise into another opportunity for sacred murder. The morning of June 15, 1962, dawned clear and humid across the Andean foothills. Father Miguel Santos adjusted his radio equipment one final time, checking the battery levels and antenna connections with the methodical precision of a man who understood that communication might mean the difference between life and death. Base camp, this is Mission 7. His voice crackled through the static to the Catholic mission station 40 miles away. We are beginning our descent into the valley at 800 hours. Weather is favorable, team morale is high, and we carry the prayers of everyone back home. Father Santos led a team unlike any that had previously attempted to enter the Forbidden Valley. Instead of soldiers or explorers seeking conquest, this expedition consisted of missionaries and anthropologists united by a shared belief that even the most isolated peoples could be reached through patience, respect, and genuine compassion. The team included Dr. Margaret Fielding, a cultural anthropologist from Oxford University, who spoke 7 indigenous languages and had spent her career studying tribal societies throughout South America. Alongside her was Dr. James Morrison, a medical doctor who had volunteered his services to remote communities across 3 continents. Brother Thomas Aquinas, a linguist and translator, carried recording equipment designed to document new languages for the first time, and Maria Elena Rodriguez, a nurse from the local indigenous community, served as both medical assistant and cultural interpreter. They descended into the valley carrying medicine instead of weapons, recording equipment instead of surveying tools, and Bibles translated into a dozen local dialects instead of maps marking potential resources to exploit. Their mission was simple: establish peaceful contact, provide medical assistance, and demonstrate that not all outsiders came bearing the gifts of conquest and violence. For 3 days, their regular radio transmissions painted a picture of cautious optimism. The team established their base camp near a clear stream, documented dozens of previously unknown plant species, and found evidence of sophisticated agriculture that suggested a highly organized society. The cultivation patterns here are remarkable, Dr. Fielding reported on day 2. Terraced gardens that seem to emerge from the mist itself, irrigation systems that work in perfect harmony with the natural water flow, and crops we've never seen before. This isn't a primitive society. It's an advanced one that has chosen different priorities than technological development. Dr. Morrison's medical observations were equally fascinating. The few traces of human habitation we've found suggest a people in excellent health. No evidence of the nutritional deficiencies or diseases common in isolated communities. Whatever their social structure, they've solved problems that plague much of the developing world. But it was Brother Thomas who provided the first hint that something extraordinary was about to unfold. "I'm hearing voices in the mist," he reported on day 3. Not threatening voices, they sound almost musical, like distant conversations or perhaps ceremonial singing. The acoustic properties of this valley are unlike anything I've encountered. Sound carries for miles but becomes transformed, almost ethereal. The final transmission came at sunset on the 3rd day. Father Santos's voice carried a note of wonder rather than fear. "We are no longer alone. They've been watching us, studying us, but not with hostility. I see figures moving through the trees, women and children, I believe. They seem as curious about us as we are about them. Tomorrow, God willing, we'll attempt first contact. Pray for us, but don't worry. These people, there's something different about them, something ancient and wise." The transmission cut off with what Mission Control later described as the sound of distant singing. Search teams reached the valley 5 days after the final communication. What they found defied explanation and challenged every assumption about the tribe's behavior pattern. The missionary camp stood exactly as it had been left, but transformed into something that resembled a shrine more than an abandoned campsite. Personal belongings had been carefully arranged in precise geometric patterns. Dr. Fielding's research notes were spread across flat stones, weighted down with smooth river rocks and protected from moisture by broad leaves. The medical supplies had been sorted and organized with scientific precision, as if someone had taken inventory of every bandage and medicine bottle. Most mysteriously, the team's recording equipment was still running. Brother Thomas's tape recorder had captured 5 continuous days of audio, though the content was unlike anything in the anthropological record. Hour after hour of what could only be described as a cultural exchange. Voices speaking in Spanish, English, and various indigenous languages, interwoven with responses in the tribe's unknown tongue. But there were no people. No bodies, no signs of violence or struggle. The recorded conversations painted a picture of unprecedented cooperation between the missionaries and the tribe. Dr. Morrison could be heard discussing herbal medicine with tribal healers, comparing European medical techniques with indigenous practices that had been refined over centuries. Dr. Fielding engaged in lengthy discussions about social organization, kinship patterns, and religious beliefs with what appeared to be tribal elders. Most remarkably, Father Santos could be heard conducting what seemed to be religious services attended by members of both groups, blending Catholic prayers with tribal chants in a spontaneous fusion of spiritual traditions. "They are not what the stories claim," Santos said in one of the final recordings. "These are people of profound wisdom and gentle hearts. Yes, they have defended themselves against those who came with violence. But they distinguish between predators and pilgrims. They see into our souls and judge us by our intentions, not our gender." The recordings revealed that the tribe had developed a sophisticated system for evaluating outsiders that went far beyond the simple gender-based selection described by earlier survivors. They assessed intentions, measured the capacity for violence, and somehow determined whether visitors posed a genuine threat to their way of life. The missionary team had passed their tests, but if the recordings showed successful contact, where were the people? Government investigators found evidence that both groups had moved deeper into the valley together, leaving behind a base camp that had been transformed into a kind of memorial or marker. Carved symbols appeared on trees throughout the area, symbols that seemed to combine Christian imagery with tribal iconography. The most haunting discovery was a message carved into a large boulder at the camp's center, written in perfect Spanish. "We go willingly to learn what cannot be taught in the outside world. Do not search for us. We have found what we came seeking." Dr. Morrison's medical journal, left behind in the precisely arranged display, contained a final entry that sent chills through the investigation team. "They have offered to show us the source of their wisdom, the place where their transformation began. We understand now that some knowledge can only be gained through complete commitment. We are ready to cross that threshold, knowing we may never return." The mission team had not been taken. They had chosen to disappear. Decades later, local guides still report glimpses of pale-skinned figures moving through the deepest parts of the valley, and voices speaking Spanish and English mixed with the tribal tongue in the evening mist. The Catholic Church officially lists the team as missing in service, but the recordings suggest a truth more complex than simple martyrdom. They had found something in that forbidden valley that was worth abandoning the entire outside world to preserve. In the summer of 1998, a package arrived at the offices of the BBC Documentary Division in London, with no return address and a postmark from a small Colombian postal station near the Amazonian border. Inside was a single VHS tape labeled simply "Valley Evidence," and a handwritten note that read, "This is what remains of the Hartley expedition. The world deserves to know." The Hartley expedition had vanished 18 months. Earlier, 6 researchers from Cambridge University who had entered the Forbidden Valley equipped with the latest digital video equipment, satellite phones, and GPS tracking devices. Despite their advanced technology, they had followed the same pattern as every previous expedition. Regular contact for several days, then increasingly strange transmissions, then silence. The tape that arrived in London contained footage that would be analyzed by experts for years, but never broadcast to the public. Officially, the BBC declared the contents too disturbing for general audiences. Unofficially, government pressure ensured the footage remained classified, but leaked transcripts of the footage, Analysis revealed content that challenges everything we thought we knew about the tribe. The first 12 minutes show standard expedition footage, the team setting up camp, documenting plant life, discussing their research objectives with academic enthusiasm. Dr. Sarah Hartley, the expedition leader, speaks directly to the camera about their hopes of finally establishing peaceful contact with one of the world's last uncontacted peoples. But at minute 13, the footage takes an unexpected turn. "Someone's been in our camp," whispers Dr. James McKinnon, the team's anthropologist, as the camera pans across their equipment. Everything has been moved, not ransacked or stolen, but rearranged with geometric precision. Backpacks form perfect triangles. Research instruments are arranged in spiral patterns. Food supplies have been sorted by color and size with mathematical accuracy. "They're showing us they were here," realizes Dr. Hartley, "but they're also showing us they mean no harm. Nothing is damaged or missing. This is communication." The footage that follows documents what appears to be an unprecedented cultural exchange. The team begins leaving gifts, medicine, tools, scientific instruments, arranged in the same geometric patterns they observed. Each morning they find responses, intricate sculptures made from jungle materials, herbal remedies for ailments they hadn't even mentioned, and tools crafted with precision that rivals modern manufacturing. But it's the footage from day 4 that has experts still debating its authenticity. The camera captures figures moving through the mist, not hiding or stalking but dancing. Dozens of women and children perform what can only be described as a welcome ceremony, their bodies painted with symbols that seem to shimmer in the filtered light. Their movements are hypnotic, synchronized with a precision that suggests centuries of practice. Dr. Rebecca Thompson, the team's linguist, can be heard in the background attempting to decode the chanted words that accompany the dance. "It's not just one language," she whispers excitedly. "I'm hearing elements of pre-Columbian dialects mixed with Spanish, Portuguese, even what sounds like English. They've been collecting languages the same way they collect people." The most controversial moment comes at minute 37, when the tribal women approach the camera directly. The lead figure, an elderly woman with intricate facial tattoos and eyes that seem to hold centuries of accumulated wisdom, speaks directly into the lens in perfect English. "We know why you have come. We know you are different from the others. But knowing and trusting are not the same thing. You must choose now. Return to your world with the knowledge that we exist in peace, or stay and learn the true price of that peace." What happens next has been the subject of intense debate among the few experts who have seen the footage. The camera work becomes erratic, as if the person filming is struggling with a profound decision. Voices can be heard arguing off camera, some team members advocating return, others insisting they stay to complete their research. Dr. Hartley's voice cuts through the debate. "This is what we came for. This is the discovery of a lifetime. How can we walk away now?" The final minutes of footage show the team following the tribal women deeper into the valley. The camera captures glimpses of structures that seem to blend seamlessly with the jungle itself, dwellings that appear to grow from the trees, pathways that follow the natural contours of the land, and clearing where hundreds of people gather in ceremonial formations. The last clear image on the tape shows Dr. Hartley removing her equipment and placing it carefully on a flat stone, along with their satellite phone and GPS devices. Her final words are barely audible over the sound of tribal singing. "Tell them we chose this. Tell them we found something worth staying for." The footage ends abruptly, but the audio continues for several more minutes. Voices speaking in multiple languages, laughter, the sound of celebration. Then, nothing but the ambient noise of the jungle. Government analysts have spent decades trying to determine if the footage is authentic. The voices match known recordings of the expedition team members. The vegetation is consistent with the valley's known geography. The tribal clothing and ceremonial objects show craftsmanship that would be nearly impossible to fake. But the implications of accepting the footage as genuine are too disturbing for public consumption. If authentic, it suggests the tribe doesn't simply kill male intruders, they evaluate them, and those who pass their tests are invited to join a society that exists entirely outside the modern world. The footage suggests that somewhere in that forbidden valley, A growing community of voluntary exiles lives according to rules that challenge everything we believe about civilization, gender, and the possibility of alternative ways of being human. And perhaps most disturbing of all, they chose to be there. The morning mist still rises from the Forbidden Valley, just as it has for countless centuries. But if you listen carefully to the stories told by today's pilots who fly over that remote region, you'll hear something new woven into the ancient legend. They speak of lights moving through the canopy at night, not the harsh glare of electric bulbs, but the soft glow of fires that seem to dance in patterns too organized to be natural. They describe radio interference that sounds almost like voices speaking in multiple languages, conversations that fade in and out like distant broadcasts from another world. The indigenous communities that ring the valley's borders continue to warn their children away from the forbidden zone. But their stories have evolved. Now they speak not just of death waiting in the mist, but of transformation. They tell of people who enter the valley and become something other than what they were before. Not killed, but changed so fundamentally that return becomes impossible. Satellite imagery shows structures that weren't there decades ago. Geometric patterns cut into the jungle canopy that form symbols visible only from above, gardens that follow mathematical principles unknown to modern agriculture, and clearings where hundreds of figures gather in formations that suggest ceremonies of staggering complexity. The valley breathes with secrets that grow deeper with each passing year. Each expedition that vanishes adds to its mystery, rather than solving it. Each survivor's account raises more questions than it answers, and each piece of evidence suggests that what exists in that perpetual mist is not simply a remnant of the past, but something actively evolving, growing, becoming something the outside world has never seen before. Somewhere in that white void, hidden beneath the canopy of an untouched jungle, a people who mastered the art of selective survival continue their ancient vigil. They watch. They judge. They choose who lives and who dies based on criteria that predate modern civilization, and they are still waiting. The valley that breathes with the spirits of the lost has become something more than a place of death. It has become a doorway to possibilities that exist only when the modern world looks away. Tonight, like every night for 8 centuries, the mist will roll through those ancient trees. And tomorrow, like every tomorrow since the first massacre that transformed a peaceful people into precision killers, someone somewhere will hear the stories and wonder, what would happen if I entered that valley? What would happen if I passed their tests? What would happen if I chose to stay? The Forbidden Valley keeps its secrets, but it offers something in return, the chance to discover what human society becomes when it evolves beyond the assumptions that govern the rest of the world. The tribe that murdered every man they captured has become something far more complex than killers. They have become the guardians of an alternative reality, where the rules of civilization have been rewritten by the wisdom of survivors who refuse to forgive, refuse to forget, and refuse to allow history to repeat itself. And in the mist that never fully clears, they continue their eternal watch, ensuring that some boundaries remain forever uncrossed by those who come bearing the gifts of conquest and control. But for those who come seeking transformation rather than domination, the valley offers something else entirely.